The blizzard hit Jefferson, Wyoming, just as Julianna Hayes was counting the last of her coins on the weathered counter of the general store, and she knew with a sinking certainty that she would not survive the winter alone. She had arrived in Jefferson 3 months earlier, in September of 1883, with enough money to last until spring, and a determination to prove she could make it without her father's ranch back in Missouri. The small cabin she had purchased on the edge of town seemed charming in autumn, with golden aspens surrounding it and elk bugling in the nearby mountains. Now, as November's first true storm rattled the store's windows with wind that sounded like wolves howling, that cabin felt like a coffin waiting to seal her fate. "That is all I have," Julianna said quietly, pushing the coins toward Samuel Morrison, the store owner. "How much will this buy?" Samuel, a graying man with kind eyes that had seen too many harsh winters, counted slowly. "Enough for maybe 2 weeks of beans, some flour, a little salt pork. Miss Hayes, you need to understand that winter up here is not like Missouri. We have had people freeze to death 20 feet from their own front doors because they could not see through the snow." "I understand," Julianna said, though her voice wavered. She was 22 years old and had been so certain of her independence when she left home. Her father had remarried after her mother's death, and his new wife made it clear there was no place for a grown daughter in their household. Julianna had taken her small inheritance and headed west, dreaming of freedom and self-sufficiency. Reality was proving far harsher than dreams. The store door burst open, bringing a gust of snow and freezing air that made Julianna gasp. A tall man entered, shaking snow from his wide-brimmed hat and the shoulders of his heavy coat. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer, that particular shade of green-gray that seemed to change with the light. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. "Samuel," the man said, his voice deep and rough like gravel underfoot, "I need to stock up before this gets worse. Wire says another storm is coming in behind this one." "Owen Whitfield," Samuel greeted him. "I was hoping you would make it down from your place before the pass closed. Miss Hayes, this is Owen Whitfield. He runs cattle on the high range, has a ranch about 15 miles north. Owen, this is Miss Julianna Hayes. She bought the old Patterson cabin." Owen's eyes moved to Julianna, and she felt his gaze take in everything about her in one swift assessment. Her worn dress that had once been fine, her thin coat, her delicate hands that had never known hard labor until recently, and her face, which she knew showed her worry despite her efforts to appear confident. "That cabin is not fit for winter," Owen said bluntly, still looking at her. "Patterson died because he was too stubborn to leave when he should have." Julianna lifted her chin. "I have managed fine so far. It was only October until last week," Owen said. "November through March is when this country shows its teeth." "I am aware of the challenges," Julianna said coldly, though fear coiled in her stomach. Samuel cleared his throat. "Owen, the lady is doing the best she can. We all are." Owen studied Julianna for another long moment, then turned to Samuel. "Give me the usual supplies, double portions. I will be riding back as soon as this lets up enough to see." As Samuel began gathering goods, Owen moved around the store with efficient purpose, selecting items and bringing them to the counter. Julianna tried not to watch him, but it was difficult not to notice the way he moved, with the confidence of someone completely at home in this harsh environment. He was tall and broad-shouldered, built for physical labor, and despite his blunt manner, there was something steady about him that made her feel, irrationally, a little safer just being in the same room. When Samuel had tallied Owen's goods, the amount made Juliana's heart sink. He was spending more on one supply run than she had in total. How did people survive out here? I will take her supplies too, Owen said suddenly. Both Juliana and Samuel looked at him in surprise. What? Juliana said. Your supplies, Owen repeated, looking at her directly. I will buy them. Add them to my bill, Samuel, and add enough to actually get her through winter. Flour, beans, rice, salt pork, coffee, sugar, dried apples, cornmeal, and whatever else she needs. I cannot accept charity, Juliana said, her cheeks burning. It is not charity, Owen said. You are going to work for it. My ranch hand quit last month, ran off to California. I need help through winter. Cooking, mending, helping with the stock when needed. You will stay at my ranch, work until spring, and your food and shelter is your payment. When the thaw comes, you can go back to your cabin or wherever you want to go. Stay at your ranch, Juliana repeated. That would not be proper. Dying frozen in a cabin is not proper either, Owen said flatly. And before you worry about your reputation, my ranch house has 2 bedrooms. You would have your own space. My housekeeper quit to help her daughter with a new baby, and I am not skilled at cooking or mending. I need help, you need supplies and shelter. It is a fair trade. Samuel looked between them. It is a practical solution, Miss Hayes. Owen's place is well built and stocked. You would be safe there. I do not know you, Juliana said to Owen, her voice barely above a whisper. That is true, Owen acknowledged. But Samuel knows me. Ask him if I am trustworthy. Owen is a good man, Samuel said firmly. He has helped many people in this town over the years. I would trust him with my own daughter. Juliana looked down at her hands, at the calluses just beginning to form from chopping wood and hauling water. She thought of her cold cabin, her dwindling supplies, the long winter ahead. Pride wanted her to refuse, but survival whispered that pride was a luxury she could not afford. Just until spring, she said finally. Just until spring, Owen agreed. The storm lasted 3 days. Juliana stayed at the boarding house in town, watching through the window as snow piled higher and higher, transforming Jefferson into a white wilderness. She spent the time hemming her skirts shorter, knowing they would be impractical at a working ranch, and preparing herself mentally for the months ahead. When Owen arrived at the boarding house on the 4th morning, the sky was a brilliant blue, and the sun on the snow was blinding. He had a wagon loaded with supplies and a sturdy horse tied behind. That is for you, he said, nodding to the horse, a gentle-eyed mare the color of rust. Her name is Cinnamon. She is old but reliable. I can ride, Juliana said, grateful that her father had at least taught her that. Good. The wagon can break trail, but you will need to ride if we get caught in weather. They left Jefferson as the town was digging itself out, smoke rising from chimneys into the still air. The journey north was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. The mountains rose around them, their peaks white against the deep blue sky. Pine forest stood silent and heavy with snow. Several times, Owen stopped to test the depth of drifts before proceeding, and once they had to backtrack and find another route when the snow proved too deep. He spoke little during the journey, focused on navigating the treacherous trail, but Juliana found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. His hands on the reins were strong and scarred, the hands of someone who worked hard every day. His profile was striking, with a straight nose and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. When he did speak, it was to point out landmarks or warn her of hazards, his voice always calm and steady. "Why did you come out here alone?" he asked suddenly, when they had stopped to rest the horses. Juliana, caught off guard by the personal question, considered not answering. But something about the vastness of the landscape, the isolation, made honesty feel safer than in town where gossip spread like wildfire. "My mother died 2 years ago," she said. "My father remarried quickly. His new wife did not want me there. She made that very clear." Owen nodded slowly. "Family can be complicated." "You have family?" Juliana asked. "Had," Owen said. "Parents died of fever when I was 16. My older brother raised me, taught me ranching. He died 4 years ago. Threw from a horse." "I am sorry," Juliana said softly. "This country takes people," Owen said, looking out at the mountains. "That is why those of us who stay have to look after each other." They reached his ranch as the sun was lowering toward the western peaks, painting the snow gold and rose. The ranch house was larger than Juliana expected, built of solid logs with a steep roof to shed snow. A barn stood nearby and several other outbuildings, all well maintained. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Juliana looked at Owen in confusion. "I left the fire banked," he explained. "Built up the stove before I left. Should still have some heat." Inside, the house was indeed warm, and Juliana nearly cried with relief. After months in her drafty cabin, the solid comfort of Owen's home felt like luxury. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace at one end and a kitchen area at the other. Furniture was simple but well made. A table and chairs, a settee near the fireplace, rugs on the wooden floor. Everything was neat, but had the slightly dusty, neglected air of a place where a single man lived without much concern for details. "Your room is there," Owen said, pointing to a door on the left. "Mine is there." He indicated another door on the right. "The necessary is out back, but there is a chamber pot in your room for night. Water pump is in the kitchen, and the well has not frozen yet, though it will soon. I will show you everything you need to know tomorrow. Tonight, let us just get settled and eat something hot." Juliana's room was small but clean, with a real bed, a dresser, and a window looking toward the mountains. She set down her few belongings and stood for a moment, taking it all in. This would be her home for the winter. This house, with a man she did not know. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt something like relief settling into her bones. When she returned to the main room, Owen had started a fire in the stove and was slicing salt pork into a heavy skillet. "Can you make biscuits?" he asked. "Yes," Juliana said. "Flour is in that bin. Lard is in the crock. There is baking powder in the cupboard. I have been eating terrible food for months. Would be grateful for something decent." They worked in silence, moving around each other in the kitchen with the awkwardness of strangers. But it was not an uncomfortable silence. Owen gave her space when she needed it, and she did the same for him. When they sat down to eat, the biscuits golden and the salt pork fried with some tinned tomatoes Owen produced from his stores, Juliana realized she was hungry in a way she had not been in weeks. Not just hungry for food, but hungry for this. Warmth, safety, another human presence. "This is good," Owen said, eating with focused appreciation. "Really good." "It is just biscuits," Juliana said. "No," Owen said. "It is the first good meal I have had since Mrs. Chen left. That matters." Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine. Juliana woke early to start the fire and make breakfast. Owen would come in from checking the stock, his face red with cold, and they would eat together in the pre-dawn darkness. Then he would head out again to tend the cattle, break ice on the water troughs, haul hay to the feeding areas, and do the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running in winter. Juliana would clean, mend clothing and linens, prepare meals, and help with whatever else needed doing. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and Juliana found she had a talent for it. Her biscuits were light, her stews hearty, her stitches neat and strong. Owen rarely offered compliments, but she noticed he always ate everything she prepared. and she sometimes caught him examining a mended shirt with something like surprise, running his fingers over her careful stitches. They talked more as the days passed. Over dinner, Owen would tell her about the ranch, about the cattle, about the challenges of high country ranching. He spoke about his brother, James, who had loved this land more than anything and had worked himself to exhaustion building the ranch into something successful. Julianna told him about Missouri, about her mother who had loved music and taught Julianna to play piano, about her father who had been a different man before grief changed him. "You miss the piano?" Owen asked one evening. "Every day," Julianna admitted. "Music was how I made sense of the world." "There is music here," Owen said. "Different music. The wind, the elk, the creek in spring. You just have to learn to hear it." December brought storms that buried the ranch under snow deeper than Julianna had imagined possible. Some mornings, Owen had to dig a path from the house to the barn, the snow walls rising above his head. The cattle huddled in the sheltered valleys, and Owen would be gone for hours checking on them, returning so cold that Julianna learned to keep a kettle of hot water ready for him to thaw his hands. One evening he came back later than usual, and Julianna had been pacing with worry, watching the darkness fall and the temperature drop. When she finally heard his footsteps on the porch, she threw open the door. "You are late," she said, hearing the fear in her own voice. Owen looked surprised. "Had a cow caught in some brush. Took a while to free her." "You should have come back earlier. What if you had been hurt? What if you had gotten lost?" "I know this land," Owen said, but his expression had softened. "Were you worried?" Julianna felt her cheeks heat. "Of course I was worried. If something happened to you, I would be stranded here alone." "Just worried about being stranded?" Owen asked quietly. She looked at him standing in the doorway, snow melting from his coat, his face rough with cold and exhaustion, and realized that was not the whole truth. She had been worried about him, about Owen himself, not just her own situation. "Come inside," she said, stepping back. "You are freezing." That night after dinner, they sat by the fire longer than usual. Owen was mending a bridle and Julianna was patching a pair of his work pants. The wind howled outside, but inside it was warm, the fire crackling pleasantly. "Why did you never marry?" Julianna asked, then immediately regretted the forward question. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "It is fine," Owen said, his hands steady on the leather. "Came close once. Girl named Sarah. She visited her aunt in Jefferson one summer and we got engaged. But when winter came, when she saw what it was really like out here, she left. Said she could not live in such isolation, such harshness." "That must have hurt," Julianna said softly. "It did," Owen admitted. "But she was right to go. This life is not for everyone. You have to love it, or at least be able to bear it, or it will break you." "What do you love about it?" Julianna asked, genuinely curious. Owen was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "The honesty of it. Everything here is what it is. The land does not lie to you, does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. If you work hard and plan well and have a little luck, you can make it. If you do not, the land will tell you plain. There is something clean about that." Julianna thought about his words as she sewed. There was a truth to them. Everything in her old life had been about appearances, about propriety, about saying one thing while meaning another. Here, the challenges were direct and clear. "I think I understand," she said. Owen looked at her, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "I think you do," he said. Christmas approached, and Julianna realized with surprise that she wanted to mark the occasion. She asked Owen if there were any evergreen trees near the house, and though he looked puzzled, he helped her cut a small pine, which she brought inside and decorated with strings of dried berries and paper ornaments she made from old newspaper. "It is foolish," she said, suddenly self-conscious as Owen stared at the decorated tree. "No," he said. "It is nice. Makes the place feel like a home." On Christmas Eve, Juliana prepared a special meal using some of their precious supplies. A roasted chicken, real vegetables from the canned goods, and a dried apple pie. Owen contributed a bottle of whiskey he had been saving, and they each had a small glass with dinner. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," Owen said, and there was such sincerity in his voice that Juliana felt tears prick her eyes. "For me as well," she said. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and Owen asked if she would sing. Juliana protested that she had no accompaniment, but he insisted, and finally, she sang some of the old hymns her mother had loved. Her voice was untrained but true, and in the quiet of the ranch house, the songs felt sacred. When she finished, Owen was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said. "You have survived something hard, and you have done it with grace." "I could not have survived without you," Juliana said honestly. "You are stronger than you think," Owen said. "You would have found a way." But Juliana was not sure that was true. As January's brutal cold settled over the ranch, she became more and more aware of how precarious survival was in this landscape. The temperature dropped so low that water froze within minutes of being carried inside. The wind was a constant presence, howling and battering at the house. Owen's face grew weathered and raw from constant exposure, and despite her best efforts, she could not keep chilblains from forming on his hands. One morning, she woke to an eerie silence and realized the wind had finally stopped. But when she opened the door to the main room, she found Owen already up, staring out the window with a tense expression. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Too quiet," he said. "And look at the sky." The western sky was a sickly yellow-gray, and even as Juliana watched, a dark wall of clouds appeared on the horizon. "Blizzard," Owen said. "A bad one. I need to get to the cattle, get them moved to the south pasture where there is more shelter." "How long will you be gone?" Juliana asked, fear sharp in her chest. "As long as it takes," Owen said, already pulling on his heavy coat. "Could be hours, could be longer. If I am not back by dark, do not worry. I will hole up in the line shack and come back when I can." "Owen," Juliana said, reaching out to touch his arm. "Be careful." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. For a moment she thought he might say something, but he only nodded. "I will be back," he said. He left, and Juliana watched from the window as he rode toward the distant pastures. The storm moved in fast, and within an hour the world had vanished into a white fury. Juliana kept the fire burning and the stove hot, waiting and worrying. Darkness fell early, as it always did in winter, and still Owen did not return. She tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. A horse could stumble, a man could lose his way, the cold could steal the life from someone in minutes. She remembered his words. People had frozen to death 20 feet from their own doors. She paced and watched and prayed to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. Midnight came and went. The storm raged on. Juliana dozed in a chair by the fire, jerking awake at every sound, hoping it was Owen returning. Dawn came gray and still stormy. Juliana was standing at the window, exhausted and sick with worry, when she saw a shape moving through the snow. She ran to the door and threw it open, and Owen stumbled inside, so covered in snow he looked like a frozen statue. "Thank God," Juliana breathed. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the fire. "You are frozen. We need to get these clothes off you." Her hands shook as she helped him remove his ice-crusted coat and gloves. His fingers were white and stiff, his face red and raw. She sat him in the chair closest to the fire and brought hot water and cloths, gently warming his hands and face, watching the color slowly return to his skin. "The cattle," she asked. "Safe," Owen said, his voice hoarse. Got them moved. Stayed in the line shack, but the wind blew out the stove. Had to keep moving all night to stay warm enough. You could have died, Julianna said, and suddenly she was crying, tears streaming down her face. You could have died and I would not have known, and— Julianna, Owen said, reaching up with one warming hand to touch her face. I am fine, I am here. I was so frightened, she whispered. I know, he said softly. I was frightened too, not of the storm, but of not making it back to you. Their eyes met, and Julianna saw in his gaze everything she had been trying not to acknowledge in her own heart. This was not just gratitude she felt, not just respect or friendship. Somewhere in the long winter days and longer nights, she had fallen in love with this quiet, steady man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. Owen, she said, his name barely a breath. He stood, and even though he was still cold, still exhausted, he pulled her close. I did not plan this, he said into her hair. Did not plan to feel this way, but Julianna, you have become everything to me. This house, this ranch, this life, it all feels empty when I think about you leaving in spring. I do not want to leave, Julianna said, pulling back to look up at him. I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other a few months, but Owen, I do not want to leave. Not in spring, not ever. He cupped her face in his hands, his rough palms warm against her skin. You are sure? This life is hard. You have only seen one winter so far. There will be more year after year. I am sure, Julianna said, because you are right. The land is honest, and so is what I feel for you. I love you, Owen. The winter has been harsh and our supplies have run low at times, but I stayed because you were warmth enough. You are still warmth enough. You always will be. Owen kissed her then, gentle and sure, and Julianna felt something in her chest open up like spring thaw, like ice breaking apart to reveal the rushing water beneath. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Not because it is practical or proper, but because I love you and I want to spend every day of my life with you. Yes, Julianna said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. They were married in February, on a day when the sun shone brilliant on the snow, and the sky was so blue, it hurt to look at. The preacher from Jefferson came up with Samuel Morrison and his wife as witnesses, and they held the ceremony in the ranch house with the decorated tree still standing in the corner. Julianna wore her best dress, mended and pressed, and Owen wore a suit that had belonged to his brother, carefully altered to fit him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Owen kissed her, Julianna thought of how strange life was, how she had come to Wyoming running from pain and loss, expecting to spend a lonely winter proving her independence, and had instead found a home and a love deeper than she had imagined possible. That night, as they lay together in Owen's bed, which was now their bed, Julianna traced the scars on his hands and thought about strength. She had thought strength was enduring alone, proving she did not need anyone. But real strength, she had learned, was allowing yourself to need someone, to trust them, to build a life together against all the hardships the world could throw at you. What are you thinking? Owen asked, his voice sleepy and content. That I am grateful for that first blizzard, Julianna said. If it had not come when it did, if I had not been in the store at the same moment as you, we might never have met. I would have met you eventually, Owen said, pulling her closer. I would have heard about the stubborn woman in Patterson's cabin and come to check on you. Stubborn, Julianna said, pretending to be offended. Stubborn, Owen confirmed, kissing her forehead. Brave and stubborn and beautiful. From the moment I saw you in that store, trying so hard to be strong, I knew you were special. I was terrified, Julianna admitted. I know. That is why I offered you the job. I told myself it was practical, but the truth is, I could not stand the thought of you alone in that cabin, afraid and cold." "You saved my life," Juliana said softly. "No," Owen said. "We saved each other." Spring came slowly, reluctantly, the snow melting in fits and starts. By late April the meadows were revealed, brown and muddy but alive. The cattle had survived the winter, most of them, and the calves began to arrive, leggy and curious. Juliana helped Owen with the ranch work, learning to ride the range, to spot problems with the herd, to understand the rhythms of this life. She wrote to her father, a careful letter explaining that she had married and was happy. His response came months later, forwarded through Jefferson. It was brief but not unkind. He wished her well and said he hoped she had found what she was looking for. It was not a reconciliation, but it was closure, and Juliana found she could be at peace with that. In May, they rode down to Jefferson for supplies, and Juliana was surprised by how the town felt both familiar and foreign. She had changed so much since that desperate day in the store. Samuel Morrison greeted them warmly, congratulating Owen and calling Juliana a miracle worker for getting him to settle down. "How was your first winter?" Samuel asked Juliana. She looked at Owen, at his weathered, beloved face, and smiled. "Harsh," she said honestly, "but not unbearable. Not with the right person beside you." Summer was a revelation. The high country burst into bloom, wildflowers painting the meadows in purple and gold. The days were long and warm, and Juliana discovered she loved the work of ranching. The physicality of it, the connection to the land, the satisfaction of seeing cattle grow fat on good grass. She and Owen worked side by side, their partnership deepening with each shared task. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains, and Owen would play his harmonica, simple melodies that blended with the wind and the distant cries of birds. Juliana would sing along sometimes, and the music filled the empty spaces in her heart that she had not realized were still there. Fall came, and they worked frantically to prepare for winter, cutting hay, repairing buildings, stocking supplies. But this time, Juliana was not afraid. She knew what was coming, and she knew they would face it together. On a cold October evening, as they sat by the fire, Juliana told Owen she was pregnant. She had been fairly certain for a few weeks, but had waited to be sure. Owen stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy?" Owen pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Juliana, I thought I would live my whole life alone. And now I have you, and soon I will have a child. I did not know I could be this happy." Their second winter was still harsh, but Juliana faced it with confidence. She knew how to manage the house now, how to stretch supplies, how to keep warm. And when Owen had to be out in the cold, she did not pace with quite the same terror, because she trusted his competence and knew he would always come back to her. In March of 1885, on a day when the wind was howling but the house was warm, Juliana gave birth to a son. Owen held the baby with a wonder that made Juliana's heart ache, this big, rough man cradling the tiny infant with infinite gentleness. "What should we name him?" Juliana asked, exhausted but content. Owen thought for a moment. "James," he said softly, "after my brother." "If that is all right with you." "James Whitfield," Juliana said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Being parents changed them both. Owen became even more careful, more focused on making the ranch successful, driven by the need to provide for his family. Juliana discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, managing the household and a baby and still helping with ranch work when she could. Little James was a sturdy baby, thriving in the clean mountain air. As he grew into a toddler, he followed his father everywhere, mimicking Owen's walk, trying to wear his hat. Juliana would watch them together and feel such profound gratitude it brought tears to her eyes. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranching life: calving in spring, haying in summer, roundup in fall, survival in winter. They had another child, a daughter they named Mary after Juliana's mother, and then another son, Thomas. The ranch house that had once seemed so large felt cozy and crowded with children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life. Through it all, Juliana and Owen remained partners in the truest sense. They worked together, made decisions together, faced challenges together. There were hard times: a drought year when they lost half the herd, an injury when Owen broke his leg and had to stay immobile for months, winters that seemed to last forever. But there were also moments of pure joy. The first time James successfully rode a horse alone, Mary's laughter as she chased butterflies in the meadow, Thomas's solemn concentration as he learned his letters. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen took Juliana riding up to a high meadow they both loved, a place where you could see for miles in every direction. The children were with a neighbor woman for the day, and it felt strange and wonderful to be alone together, like they were courting again. They dismounted and sat on a flat rock, looking out at the vista of mountains and valleys, the ranch a small cluster of buildings far below. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked. "Staying here, choosing this life?" Juliana leaned against him, his arm solid and warm around her shoulders. "Never," she said firmly. "Owen, I was lost when I came here. I thought I wanted independence, but what I really needed was a place to belong, a person to belong with. You gave me that." "You gave it to me too," Owen said. "This ranch, I built it with my brother, and after he died, it felt like a monument to loss. You made it a home again. You filled it with life and love." "The winter was harsh and supplies low," Juliana said, remembering those early days. "But I stayed because you were warmth enough." "That is still true. You are still warmth enough, Owen. You always will be." He kissed her then, tender and deep, and they stayed on the mountain until the sun began to set, talking about their children, their plans for the ranch, their dreams for the future. The children grew. James developed Owen's love for the land and his steady competence, and it became clear he would take over the ranch someday. Mary inherited Juliana's love of beauty and music, and she would sing as she worked, filling the house with melodies. Thomas was curious about everything, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. Juliana taught all 3 children to read and write and do mathematics, and Owen taught them to ride and work cattle and read the weather. Together, they instilled in their children the values that had sustained them: hard work, honesty, care for others, respect for the land. More years passed. The children became young adults. James married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and they built a cabin on the north section of the ranch. Mary fell in love with the schoolteacher who came to Jefferson, and though Juliana worried about her daughter moving to town, she saw that Mary was happy and had to let her go with her blessing. Thomas decided he wanted to study law and headed east for college, promising to return. Juliana and Owen found themselves alone again in the ranch house, and it felt both sad and sweet. The house was quieter now, too big for just 2 people, full of memories and echoes of childish laughter, but their love had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened, matured, become even more essential. They moved through the house in comfortable synchronization, finishing each other's sentences, communicating with glances. Owen's hair had gone gray, and Juliana's face showed lines from years of sun and wind. But when he looked at her, she still saw the same admiration and love that had been in his eyes when he proposed. One winter evening, as they sat by the fire much as they had decades before, Owen reached over and took her hand. "You remember that first winter?" he asked. "Every day of it," Juliana said. "I was so scared, so unprepared." "I knew that day in the store," Owen said. "When I saw you counting those coins, trying so hard to be brave, I knew I was in trouble. I told myself I was just being practical, offering you work, but the truth is I wanted you close. I wanted to know you." "And now you know me better than anyone," Juliana said. "And now I know you better than anyone," Owen agreed. "And I love you more with every passing year. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Juliana. This life we built, these children we raised, this home we made, it is all because you stayed that winter. Because you were brave enough to trust me. You were brave enough to ask," Juliana said. "You saw someone struggling and offered help without judgment, without conditions. That says everything about who you are." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the fire. Outside, snow was falling again, another winter storm settling over the ranch. But inside it was warm, and Juliana felt profoundly content. More years unfolded. Grandchildren arrived, bringing new energy and joy to the ranch. James and his wife had 3 children who loved to visit, racing through the house and begging for stories about when their father was young. Mary and the schoolteacher had 2 children, town-bred but fascinated by ranch life. Thomas returned from college, became a lawyer as planned, but chose to practice in Jefferson rather than staying in the East, and he married a widow with a young daughter who quickly became part of the family. Owen and Juliana watched their family grow with deep satisfaction. They had started with nothing but determination and love, and they had built something that would outlast them, something meaningful and good. As they grew older, they slowed down, but they never stopped working. Owen still rode out to check the cattle, though James did most of the heavy work now. Juliana still cooked and kept house, though her hands grew stiff with arthritis. They took care of each other with the practiced ease of a lifetime together, Owen helping Juliana with tasks that required strength, Juliana reminding Owen to rest when he pushed himself too hard. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch. The house and barn and yard were full of people, their children and their spouses, their grandchildren ranging from babies to teenagers, neighbors and friends from town. There was music and dancing and a feast that took days to prepare. As the sun set and people began to disperse, some to sleep in the barn, others in wagons under the stars, Owen and Juliana stood on their porch, watching it all. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, and everything felt exactly right. "We did well," Owen said softly. "We did," Juliana agreed. "We did very well." As the years continued, they talked sometimes about that first winter, about how a desperate decision had led to everything that came after. Juliana would remember the fear she felt, the uncertainty, and then the slow growing warmth of falling in love. Owen would remember seeing her in the store, small and proud and scared, and feeling an immediate protective instinct that had transformed into the deepest love of his life. They both knew they were fortunate. The West had taken so many people, had broken so many dreams. But they had survived and thrived, not because the land had been kind, but because they had faced it together. On a spring morning when Juliana was 68 and Owen was 73, they rode up to their favorite meadow one more time. The wildflowers were in bloom, and the air was sweet with the scent of grass and pine. They dismounted and sat on their rock, hands clasped, looking out at the land they had made their own through decades of work and love. "I would not change anything," Juliana said. "Not one moment, not one hardship. It all led to this." "To us," Owen said. "To us," Juliana agreed. They stayed on the mountain for hours, talking and remembering, watching the clouds move across the sky and the shadows shift in the valleys below. When they finally rode back down to the ranch, to the house that was still home, to the family that was still growing, they did so with the deep contentment of people who had lived fully and loved completely. Years later, when Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, Julianna mourned deeply, but without regret. They had been together for 43 years, had built a life that was rich and full, had raised children who carried their values into the world. She lived 4 more years after Owen, staying in the ranch house with James and his family, watching her great-grandchildren play in the same meadows where her own children had played. On her last day, surrounded by family, Julianna thought back to that first winter. She remembered the fear, the cold, the uncertainty. She remembered Owen's steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he had offered her help without judgment. She remembered falling in love by firelight, the joy of their wedding day, the birth of their first child. She remembered decades of partnership, of working side by side, of facing everything the world could throw at them and emerging stronger. The winter had been harsh and supplies had run low, but she had stayed because the cowboy was warmth enough. And from that decision, from that love, had sprung everything good in her life. As her eyes closed for the last time, Julianna Hayes Whitfield smiled, thinking of Owen waiting for her, and knowing that their love story, which had begun in a blizzard and grown through the hard seasons of life, was the truest and best story she could have lived. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations. James's children and grandchildren worked the land, and the story of Owen and Julianna became family legend, told and retold at gatherings. How a desperate woman and a lonely rancher had found each other in a Wyoming winter and built a love that lasted a lifetime. The house stood strong, sheltering new generations, and sometimes on winter nights when the wind howled and the snow fell, the descendants of Owen and Julianna would sit by the fire and think of their ancestors, and they would understand that real love is not just passion or romance, but partnership and commitment, choosing each other day after day, year after year, no matter how harsh the winter or how low the supplies. Because in the end, the right person, the right love, is warmth enough to survive anything,